There is a grave in this county with a marble angel over it. It says a 12-year-old girl died in 1824. She didn't. Tonight, I'm going to show you how a child declared legally dead turned herself into a business empire, and why the most dangerous thing in this story was never her skin, it was the silence around her. That girl was sold in the rain to a circus merchant. She grew up under gaslights as Europe's most famous monster. She made kings applaud. She made her owner rich. And then she bought the estate that buried her. I found these two papers filed away in the cabinet of this office, separated by half a century of dust. The world prefers the first story. The world likes a tragedy where the unfortunate child passes away gently to the sound of violins. It is clean. It makes people feel a pleasant sort of sadness. But the truth is not clean. It smells of lamp oil, sawdust, and cold cash. The truth is that on the night of her funeral, Clara was breathing, and she was watching the hearse leave from the crack of a circus wagon. This is not a story about a ghost. It is a story about a sale. And to understand the sale, we must go back to the inventory. We must go back to the room where they kept her. They called it the nursery, but it was a vault. The curtains were never drawn back. The sun was considered an enemy. In that great house with its 12 chimneys and its manicured gardens, there was one room that always smelled of stale olive oil and heavy tallow. That was Clara's world. She was born with a skin that the doctors called a calamity and her father called a punishment. It did not stretch. It grew too fast, thickening into plates, drying out until it felt like the bark of a birch tree or the armor of a beetle. To move was to crack. To smile was to bleed. The only mercy was oil, grease, lard, anything to soften the shell so the child inside could breathe. You can imagine the silence of that life. By the time she was 10, Clara had learned the art of remaining perfectly still. It was not patience, it was survival. If she sat like a statue, the skin would not pull. If she kept her face rigid, the eyes would not water. She listened to the house through the floorboards. She heard the servants' footsteps slowing down as they passed her door, fearful of catching the curse. She heard the dinner parties downstairs, the clink of crystal glasses, the laughter that she was forbidden to join. Her meals were pushed through the door on a tray, often by a maid who held a handkerchief over her nose, as if dry skin were a contagion like the plague. They fed her, they greased her, and they waited for her to die. But Clara did not die. She was strong. Her heart beat with a stubborn, quiet rhythm against the ribs that were wrapped in that iron skin. And this was the problem. A dead monster is a tragedy the family can use for sympathy. A living monster is a scandal. I have the diary of the family physician, a man named Dr. Morrell. His handwriting is jittery, the mark of a man who drinks too much brandy before noon. On the entry for that winter he wrote, "The Count is exhausted. The expense of the oils is trivial to him, but the expense of the shame is bankrupting his spirit. He asked me today if there is a mercy to be found in medicine. I told him there are other kinds of mercy." Other kinds of mercy, a polite phrase for a disposal. The transaction happened on a Tuesday. The storm outside was convenient. The thunder covered the sound of the wheels. Clara was awake. She was always awake at night because the itching was worse in the dark. The door opened, but it wasn't the maid with the tray. It was her father. She hadn't seen him in 3 months. He was holding a candelabra, and the light danced on his pale, sweating face. He didn't look at her. He never looked at her. He looked at the wall above her head and said, "Get up. You are going on a journey for your health." They wrapped her in a wool blanket, scratchy and rough. It hurt, but she didn't cry out. She had learned long ago that crying only dried the face and made the skin tighter. She was carried down the back stairs, the servants' stairs. The house was sleeping. They went out into the stable yard, where the rain was turning the frozen earth into mud. There was no carriage with the family crest waiting for her. There was a wagon. It was painted a dark, peeling red, and it smelled of wet fur and raw meat. A man stood by the horses. He was not a servant. He wore a coat that was too colorful for a funeral, and a hat that had seen 1,000 different towns. This was Grimaldi. In the newspapers they called him a showman. In the church sermons they called him a trafficker of souls. In that yard, he was simply a merchant inspecting goods. I want you to understand the brutality of this moment. A father was handing his daughter to a stranger in the rain. There were no goodbyes. The Count handed Grimaldi a heavy envelope, money to take the burden away, money to ensure she never spoke the family name again. Grimaldi counted it. He was thorough. Then he lifted the lantern and pulled back the blanket to look at Clara. For the first time in her life, the person looking at her did not recoil. Grimaldi did not gasp. He did not cross himself. He leaned in, squinting, examining the geometric patterns of her skin, the way the scales overlapped on her neck. He reached out a gloved finger and touched her cheek. It was a cold, professional touch, like a man checking the quality of silk or the strength of a horse's teeth. "Dry?" he grunted. It was not an insult, it was an observation. "She needs humidity. You've kept her too close to the fires. The heat makes it brittle." He looked at the father, and for a second, the showman looked more aristocratic than the Count. "You kept her in a kiln and wondered why she cracked. Typical." He tossed the blanket back over her and lifted her effortlessly into the back of the wagon. The wood was damp. She was placed on a pile of straw that smelled of lions. The door slammed shut, cutting off the sight of her father's house. The wagon lurched forward. Clara heard the iron gates creak open, and then the rhythmic thud of hooves on the road. She did not know where she was going. She knew only that she had been traded. She had ceased to be a daughter. She had become an object. For 3 days, they traveled. The world inside the wagon was a strange twilight. There were others in there, cages covered in tarp. Sometimes she heard a growl, low and rumbling, vibrating through the floorboards. Sometimes she heard the chatter of a monkey. She lay in the straw, stiff and terrified, waiting for the end. But the end did not come. Instead, a routine began. Twice a day, Grimaldi stopped the wagon. He did not throw stale bread at her. He opened the back and climbed in with a bucket of water and a sponge. He had different oils, smelly, viscous substances that he had brewed himself. He applied them with a brisk, efficient energy. "Hold still," he would say. "This is shark oil. Stinks like the devil, but it holds the moisture better than that perfumed trash your mother used." He didn't speak to her as a child. He spoke to her as an investment. "You have to drink water," he told her when she refused a cup. "If you dry out, you cannot work. And if you cannot work, you are useless to me. I do not carry dead weight." Work? The word was foreign to her. What work could a monster do? In her father's house, Her only job was to be invisible. "You think you are ugly," Grimaldi said one evening, tearing off a piece of dried meat for his dinner. "That is because you were raised by people who value the ordinary. They like smooth china plates and trimmed hedges. Boring. The world out there is bored, girl. They are tired of the ordinary. They want to see the edges of God's imagination. They want to see the things that shouldn't exist." He pointed a greasy finger at her. "You are a texture. You are a pattern. In the right light, with the right story, you're not a medical failure. You are a dragon." On the fourth day, they stopped in a market town. Grimaldi didn't let her out. "Not yet," he said. "The product is not ready." He spent the afternoon painting a canvas sheet. Clara watched him through the gap in the partition. He was painting words and letters 2 feet high, dripping with red and gold. She couldn't read well then. Her education had been sparse, but she recognized the shapes of letters that looked like claws. He was painting a creature that looked something like her, but majestic, fierce, half woman and half serpent. That night, he came into the wagon with a new calmness. He held something in his hand. It wasn't food, and it wasn't oil. It was a mirror, a small, handheld-looking glass with a chipped wooden handle. "Look," he commanded. Clara shrank back. "In the house there, were no mirrors in the nursery." If she caught her reflection in a window pane at night, she would turn away quickly. She knew what she was. She was the shame. "Look," he repeated harder this time. She took the handle. Her hand trembled, the stiff skin over her knuckles pulling tight. She raised the glass. She saw the patches on her face, the mosaic of dark, hardened skin that framed her eyes. She saw the way her mouth was set in a permanent line of endurance. "What do you see?" Grimaldi asked. "A monster," she whispered. It was the first time she had spoken in days. Her voice was raspy, unused. "Wrong," Grimaldi said. He leaned forward and tapped the glass. "You see a ticket? You see a dinner? You see a roof over your head that you paid for?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single silver coin. He placed it on her palm, right on top of the thickened callus. The metal was cool. "This is the first rule of the circus," he said. "Shame is free. We don't do free. Everything you are, your skin, your pain, the way you have to sit still so you don't bleed, everything has a price. And we are going to make them pay it." He closed her fingers over the coin. "Your family buried you, girl. They paid the priest to say the words, and they put a stone with your name on it in the graveyard. As far as the law is concerned, you are dust. That means you belong to nobody. You have no name, no past, and no sins. You are just what we build you to be." He stood up, towering over her in the cramped space. The smell of the shark oil was overpowering, but for the first time it didn't smell like sickness. It smelled like armor. "Rest now," he said. "Tomorrow we start the training. You have to learn to stop twitching. A reptile doesn't twitch. A reptile waits." He blew out the lantern. In the darkness, Clara lay on the straw, clutching the silver coin. Her skin burned and itched as it always did, but her mind was quiet. She had been sold like cattle, driven away like refuse, and erased from the book of the living. But in her hand she held something hard and real. She held a wage. She wasn't a daughter anymore. She was an employee. And for the first time in 12 years, she didn't feel like dying. She felt curious. She fell asleep to the sound of the rain drumming on the canvas roof, while miles away in the family crypt, the wreaths on her grave were already starting to wilt. The dead girl was sleeping soundly. The lizard lady was just waking up. Do you know what gaslight smells like? Not the electric lamps you have now, clean and steady. I mean the old gaslights in a provincial theater. They smelled of sulfur and burning air. They hissed like snakes, and they were hot. So hot that if you stood under them for too long, they would dry the moisture right out of your eyeballs. For Clara, the stage was an oven. It was an instrument of torture, designed to turn her skin into the very bark she was trying to shed. But that was the job. It is 1826. We're in a town you wouldn't find on a map anymore, a place hungry for wonder. The theater is packed. The wooden benches are groaning under the weight of farmers, clerks, and their wives, all squeezing together, sweating in their wool coats, craning their necks. They have paid 3 pennies, a day's wage for some, to see the creature from the poster. They want the monster. They want to be scared. Grimaldi stood at the curtain. He wore a velvet coat that had seen better days, but in the dim light he looked like a king. He didn't just open the curtain. He seduced the crowd. He told them a lie about finding her in the swamps of the Amazon, about a lost tribe of dragon people, about a curse placed by a witch doctor. The crowd leaned in, terrified and thrilled. Backstage in the dark, Clara sat on a wooden stool. She was not trembling. She had learned the lesson. Trembling cracks the paint. Yes, paint. Grimaldi enhanced the truth. Her natural skin was a patchwork of dry, darkened plates, geometric and rough, beautiful in a tragic way. But Grimaldi added green and gold powder to the crevices. He made her look like a jewel that breathed. He oiled her hair until it looked like wet seaweed. "You are not a girl," he whispered to her before the curtain rose. "You are a myth. Do not blink. Do not smile. Just exist." The curtain parted. The light hit her. Silence. That is the sound of a successful freak show. Not screaming, but a sudden collective inhalation of breath. 400 people stopped breathing at once. Clara sat on a mock throne made of papier-mâché rocks. She didn't move. She stared out into the black void where the audience sat, her eyes unblinking. Her skin felt tight, pulling across her cheekbones as the heat of the lights attacked the oil. But she held it. A woman in the front row gasped, hiding her face in her shawl. A man stood up, mouth open. They looked at her scales, her stiff posture, the way her hands rested on her knees like talons. They were looking for the trick. They were waiting to see the zipper of a costume. But there was no zipper. This was flesh. And then Clara did something Grimaldi hadn't taught her. In the silence, a child began to cry. A sharp, frightened sound from the balcony. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable. The spell of horror was breaking into pity, which is bad for business. Clara moved, slowly with the deliberate gliding grace of a lizard warming itself on a stone. She turned her head. She looked up at the balcony. She didn't hiss. She didn't growl. She slowly raised one hand, palm open, and blew a kiss. It was a small human gesture. It was a contradiction. The monster had manners. The crowd erupted. It wasn't fear anymore, it was thunder. They clapped until the dust fell from the rafters. They stomped their feet. They had come to see a beast, and she had given them a queen. Grimaldi watched from the wings, his eyes narrowing. He was calculating the coin. He saw that they didn't just want to stare. They wanted to worship. That night after the show, Grimaldi counted the take. A pile of copper and silver on the greasy table of the caravan. Clara sat in the corner, wiping the gold powder from her face with a rag soaked in lard. Her skin was red and angry from the heat. "You improvised," Grimaldi said, not looking up from the money. Clara paused. "The child was crying." "The child paid for a scare, not a lullaby." Grimaldi stacked the coins. Clink, clink, clink. "But they liked it. The contrast. The lady and the beast." "Yes, we keep it." He pushed a small stack of coppers toward her. 3 coins. "Your share," he said, "for the work. The rest goes to the horses. The bribe for the mayor, the rent of the hall, the food." Clara took the coins. To her, it was a fortune. She was 14 years old. She had bought her own bread that morning. She had a new shawl. She felt rich. She didn't know yet that the pile on Grimaldi's side of the table was 50 times larger. She didn't know mathematics. She only knew gratitude. But gratitude has a shelf life. It rots faster than fruit. Years passed. The wagon became a carriage. The provincial halls became city theaters in Paris, Vienna, Berlin. The poster changed. It wasn't the lizard thing anymore. It was La Belle Reptile. Elegant lithographs showed Clara in a silk gown, with her scales proudly displayed, holding a fan. She was the toast of Europe in 1838. Aristocrats invited the troupe to private salons. Doctors wrote papers about her condition, debating whether she was a new species or a medical miracle. But with fame came the cage. You see, a mystery loses its value if you see it buying apples in the market. Grimaldi understood this. To keep the ticket prices high, Clara had to remain invisible off stage. "You are not like them," Grimaldi told her in a hotel suite in Vienna. The room was velvet and gold, but the windows were locked. "If they see you drinking coffee, if they see you laughing at a joke, you become ordinary. Nobody pays a guinea to see a woman with a skin condition. They pay to see the enigma. You stay in the room." So she stayed. Imagine being 20 years old, famous, with money in your purse, in the most beautiful cities of the world, and never feeling the sun on your face, unless it was through a glass pane. She heard the carriages rattling on the cobblestones of Paris. She smelled the roasting chestnuts from the street vendors. She saw lovers walking along the sand, but she sat in a humidity-controlled room, applying her oils, reading cheap novels, and waiting for the carriage that would take her to the theater door, covered in a veil. Grimaldi hired a maid to watch her, a stern woman named Mrs. Hobb, who had hands like granite. But Mrs. Hobb had a weakness. She liked sherry, and she liked to gossip. Clara, who had spent her childhood listening through walls, was a good listener. She learned that the strong man, a gentle giant named Sven, was paid 5 times what she was paid, even though the audience came for her. She learned that Grimaldi had bought a townhouse in London. She learned that the expenses Grimaldi claimed were eating her profits were mostly imaginary. And then she found the book. It was 1840. They were in London. Grimaldi had gone to a club for gentlemen. He had left his satchel. He was arrogant. He thought Clara was too simple to understand business. But Clara had changed. The girl who was sold in the rain had learned to read. First the newspapers that mentioned her, then the novels, and finally the bills. She opened the satchel. It smelled of tobacco and lies. Inside was a ledger, a thick book bound in red leather. Receipts and disbursements. Clara opened it. The pages were covered in neat columns of numbers. She traced the lines with her finger. October 14th, Covent Garden. Gross take, £400. Expenses, £40. Profit, £360. She looked at her own. Entry for that week. Wages, Clara, £2. £2 out of 360. She felt a coldness that had nothing to do with her skin. It was the chill of a fool waking up. For 12 years, she had believed Grimaldi was her savior. She believed he was the only one who could navigate the world for her, the only one who could turn her curse into a living. She believed the lies about the cost, the expensive special oils, the bribes, the taxes. The oils cost pennies. She saw the invoice. The bribes were non-existent. The taxes were minimal. She turned the page. Purchase of Clara, 1824. £50, paid in full. Return on investment to date, £14,000. He had written it there. Return on investment, like she was a share in a coal mine or a prize breeding sow. Clara closed the book. She didn't scream. She didn't tear the pages. She sat very still, exactly as she had been trained. She remembered the stillness of the nursery, the silence of the waiting. But this was a different kind of stillness. This was the stillness of a hunter waiting for the wind to change. She looked at her reflection in the hotel mirror. The reptile queen stared back. The skin was rough. The eyes were dark. But behind those eyes, the terrified child was gone. £2, she whispered to the empty room. I am the show. I am the reason they line up in the rain. I am the nightmare they pay for, and I am worth £2. She heard the door handle turn. Grimaldi was back. He stumbled in, flushed with wine and success. He saw her sitting by the fire, the ledger back in the bag. She was fast. Still up, my dear? He slurred. You look dry. Put on some cream. We have a matinee tomorrow. The Duke of York is coming. Look your best. He patted her head like one pats a loyal dog that doesn't understand human speech. I will, Clara said. Her voice was smooth. I will be perfect. Grimaldi went to bed, snoring within minutes. Clara stayed by the fire. She looked at the flames. She realized then that there is a glass ceiling for monsters. You can be famous. You can be celebrated. You can be the jewel of the season, but as long as someone else holds the keys to the door, you are just livestock in silk. She needed leverage. She couldn't just leave. The contract bound her for another 10 years. If she ran, he would send the police. He had the law. She had the scales. Who would a judge believe? A respectable showman or a runaway freak? No. She couldn't run. She had to negotiate. But you cannot negotiate when you are begging. You can only negotiate when you are holding a knife to the other man's throat. I want to pause here. I need to show you something from my desk. Look at this sheet of paper. It is a draft, written on the stationery of the Royal Hotel, London. The handwriting is not the jagged, angry script of her later years. It is careful, round, the handwriting of someone who is teaching herself to form the letters. It says, partnership, equal share. Right to refuse private showings. Right to walk in the city unveiled. My name on the deed. It is a declaration of independence written by a woman who was legally property. It seems impossible, doesn't it? How does the specimen dictate terms to the scientist? Narrators usually tell you that freedom comes from a grand speech or a sudden rebellion. But real freedom, the kind that lasts, the kind that buys estates, comes from timing. It comes from knowing exactly when the other person needs you more than they need air. Clara waited. She didn't strike the next day. She didn't strike the next week. She performed. She smiled. She accepted her £2. She let Grimaldi feel safe. She let him spend more money on gambling, believing his gold mine was secure. She waited until the debt collectors were starting to circle him. And then she waited for the biggest night of his career, November 1841. A royal command performance, not a duke, not a count, the king. The theater was decorated with flags. The box was reserved. The press was in a frenzy. This was the night that would secure Grimaldi's reputation for the next decade. If the show went well, he would be knighted by the public's adoration. If the show failed, if the reptile refused to appear, he would be ruined. He would be laughed out of London. Backstage, the air was buzzing. The musicians were tuning their violins. The scent of gas and anticipation was thicker than ever. Grimaldi was frantic, checking his cravat, checking the lights. 5 minutes, the stage manager called. Grimaldi rushed to Clara's dressing room. He opened the door without knocking. Time, my dear. The king is in his box. History awaits. Clara was sitting at her vanity. She was wearing her dressing gown. Her face was clean. No green powder, no gold dust, no oil. She looked distinctively human, and she was reading a newspaper. Clara, Grimaldi barked. What are you doing? Where's your makeup? The curtain goes up in 5 minutes. Clara turned the page of the newspaper. She didn't look at him. Clara, he grabbed her shoulder. Did you hear me? The king. Clara closed the newspaper. She turned on her stool. She looked at him with that terrifying reptile stillness. She picked up a piece of paper, the hotel stationery, with her careful handwriting. I'm not going out there, she said. Her voice was calm, conversational. Grimaldi laughed, a nervous, choking sound. Stop playing games. Put on the paint. I am not playing, she said. I am retiring. Unless you sign this. She held out the paper. What is this? Grimaldi snatched it. He read the first line. His face went purple. Partnership, 50%. Are you mad? I made you. You are nothing without me. A sideshow. A mistake of nature. Perhaps, Clara said, but the king is waiting to see the mistake. And the mistake is not dressed. From the auditorium, the sound of applause began. The rhythmic clapping of a crowd, getting impatient. You wouldn't dare, Grimaldi hissed. I'll have you thrown in the asylum. I'll have you on the street. You might, Clara agreed, tomorrow. But tonight, the king is waiting. And if the curtain opens and the stage is empty, who will be the fool? Me? Or the man who promised a dragon and delivered an empty chair? The clapping grew louder. Someone started stomping. The stage manager stuck his head in. Mr. Grimaldi, the anthem is finishing. 2 minutes. Grimaldi looked at the door. He looked at Clara. He looked at the paper. Sweat was running down his forehead, melting his own makeup. He realized with a shock that almost stopped his heart that she meant it. She was willing to burn it all down. She was willing to destroy her own career just to destroy him. You ungrateful witch, he whispered. Partner, she corrected. She dipped a quill pen into the ink pot and held it out to him. Sign, or go tell His Majesty to go home. The music swelled. The final crescendo of the anthem. Grimaldi's hand shook as he took the pen. He looked at her one last time, hoping to see the scared girl from the wagon. He didn't find her. He found a businesswoman. He signed. A jagged, furious scrawl. He threw the pen on the floor. Get dressed, he snarled. I am already dressed, Clara said, picking up the contract and tucking it into her bodice. Tonight, the Queen of Reptiles wears no paint. Tonight, They see the real skin. It is time for a rebrand. She stood up. She dropped her dressing gown. Underneath, she wore a simple, majestic gown of black silk that contrasted starkly with her pale, plated skin. She looked terrifying. She looked magnificent. She walked past him, toward the lights, toward the noise, toward the king. She didn't need to hold her breath anymore. She owned the air in the room. But as she stepped onto the stage, and the roar of the crowd washed over her, Clara knew something Grimaldi didn't. This wasn't the victory. This was just the weapon. The real battle, the one that would break her heart, not just her bank account, was waiting in a letter that hadn't been written yet. She had conquered the King of England. Now, she would have to face the ghost of her brother. We often think that the hardest part of a battle is the fighting. It isn't. The fighting is simple. Adrenaline, noise, the instinct to survive. No, the hardest part is the peace that comes afterwards. When you have been a soldier, or a survivor, or a specimen for 20 years, silence does not feel like rest. It feels like an ambush waiting to happen. By 1855, Clara had found peace. She was 31 years old. The partnership agreement with Grimaldi had made her wealthy. When the old showman finally drank himself into a grave in Liverpool, she bought out his share of the company. She changed the name of the troupe. She changed the costumes. She stopped touring the muddy provincial fairs and only played the grand opera houses of Vienna, Prague, and St. Petersburg. I have a photograph from this time. It is an early daguerreotype, silvery and ghostly. Clara is sitting in a garden chair. She's wearing a high-collared dress of dark velvet that hides her neck but leaves her face exposed. She looks calm. Her skin is still plated, still marked by the geometric scales that once made children scream, but her expression is not one of fear. It is the expression of a woman who owns the chair she sits in. Standing behind her, with one hand resting gently on the back of the chair, is a man. His name was Sven. He was the troupe's logistics manager, a former strongman who had retired when his knees gave out. He was a giant of a man, with hands the size of shovels and a voice like a grinding millstone. But the diaries tell us he was the one who mixed her oils every morning. He was the one who checked the humidity in her hotel rooms. He was the one who stood between her and the curious public, not as a guard dog, but as a wall. He didn't love her in spite of the scales. He loved the woman who lived beneath them. They lived in a large apartment in Vienna. It had special humidifiers, copper basins of water placed near the radiators to keep the air moist. It was a sanctuary. Clara had learned to sleep through the night without waking up to check if she was still human. She had stopped listening to the footsteps in the hallway, and then the letter came. It arrived on a Tuesday, just like her exile had begun on a Tuesday. The postman delivered it on a silver tray. It wasn't a business letter. It wasn't an invoice or a fan's admiration. The paper was thick, creamy, expensive, the kind of stationery that smells of old money and damp libraries. But the seal on the back was broken. Clara recognized the handwriting instantly. It was spidery, jagged, impatient. It was the handwriting of a boy she hadn't seen in 3 decades. Her brother, Edmund, I found. This letter preserved in a lawyer's box. It is a masterpiece of cruelty. It doesn't begin with, "Dear sister." It begins with, "To the imposter." Edmund wrote that their father was dead. He wrote that the estate was challenged, a polite word for bankrupt. He wrote that he had seen a lithograph of the reptile queen in a London shop window and recognized the shape of her eyes. He wrote that it was an abomination that a creature of her nature was parading herself before kings, while the true heirs of the bloodline suffered in dignified poverty. But then came the hook, the blackmail. If you do not remit the sum of £5,000 to the estate account by the 1st of the month, I shall have no choice but to write to the newspapers. I will reveal that the great freak of Europe is actually a daughter of our house. Imagine the scandal, Clara. Imagine the shame. Not for us. We have nothing left to lose. But for you, when the world knows you are a runaway lunatic, a defective child who was supposed to be dead, will they still cheer? Or will they come with nets to take you to the asylum where you belong? It was a hollow threat. Logically, Clara knew this. She was a celebrity. He was a nobody in a crumbling house. But trauma doesn't understand logic. Trauma understands gravity. When Clara read those words, 30 years of survival evaporated. The walls of her Vienna apartment vanished, and she was back in the nursery, listening to the servants whisper about the monster upstairs. She felt dirty. She felt the old deep shame that Grimaldi hadn't been able to scrub off. The shame that says, you are wrong. You are broken. You do not belong in the light. She panicked. Sven found her in the bathroom. She was kneeling by the tub, scrubbing her arms with a rough brush. She was trying to sand herself down. The water was red. She was crying, a dry, rasping sound, scrubbing harder and harder, as if she could peel off the lizard lady and find a normal, pink, soft woman underneath who wouldn't be blackmailed. Clara! Sven didn't shout. He just said her name. He took the brush from her hand. He didn't pull her up. He knelt down beside her. He let the water run. He looked at the bleeding scales on her arm, and he didn't look away. They found me, she whispered. He knows. He's going to tell them I'm a fake. You are not a fake, Sven said. His voice was very low. You are the most real thing in this world. I am a freak, she sobbed. I am just a freak with a bank account. I have to pay him. If I pay him, he'll go away. I have the money. I can make it stop. Sven reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter. He had read it. He looked at the soggy piece of paper. And then he looked at the woman he loved. Clara, he said, look at me. Do you think this money is for silence? No. This money is rent. He thinks he still owns you. He thinks you're still in that room upstairs. He stood up and offered her a towel. It was soft, heated on the radiator. You have two choices, Sven said. You can send him the check. If you do, you will be paying him for the rest of your life. Every time you smile, every time you succeed, he will be there, hand out, reminding you that you are really just a corpse he forgot to bury. Or, Clara asked, clutching the towel. Or, Sven said, you stop acting like the victim and start acting like the bank. He says the estate is challenged. He says he is desperate. Sven smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who used to lift circus wagons for a living. Rich people don't beg, Clara. If he is begging, he is weak. And if he is weak, then you are the predator. It took 3 days to prepare. Clara didn't send a check. Instead, she went to her lawyer. She went to the City Bank of Vienna. She withdrew a large box of documents, not cash, but promissory notes. She bought debts. She bought every mortgage, every unpaid butcher's bill, every lien against her, father's estate that she could find. It was easy. The family name had lost its credit years ago. The paper was cheap. Then she ordered the carriage. This was not the red circus wagon of her childhood. It was a black, sleek, iron-reinforced carriage with silver handles. And she didn't travel alone. This is the part of the story I love the most. She took the freaks with her. She took Sven. She took the accountant, a man with a humpback who was a genius with numbers. She took the lawyer, a Jewish man who had been barred from practicing in the courts, but found a home in the theater. It was a caravan of the rejected. They rode through Europe, crossing borders, changing horses, moving with the relentless speed of an invading army. Clara sat in the back. She didn't hide behind a veil. She wore a traveling suit of gray wool, tailored to fit her perfectly. She watched the landscape change. She watched the mountains turn into the rolling hills of her childhood. She saw the village where the church bell had rung for her funeral. She saw the gates of the estate. The gates were rusted. The ivy had grown wild, swallowing the stone lions that guarded the entrance. The drive was full of potholes. The trees were overgrown, blocking the sun. The house itself looked like a skull, paint peeling, shutters hanging loose, the roof sagging like a broken spine. It smelled of wet rot and neglect. The carriage stopped. Sven opened the door. He offered Clara his hand. She stepped out. Her boots crunched on the gravel. It was the same sound she had heard 30 years ago, wrapped in a blanket. But the rhythm was different now. "Stay here," she told the others. "The lawyer comes with me and Sven." They walked up the steps. There was no butler to open the door. The knocker was missing, sold, perhaps. Sven pushed the heavy oak door. It groaned and swung open. The hallway was dark. It smelled of old cabbage, dog hair, and cheap gin. There were shadows on the walls where paintings used to hang. The grand staircase was covered in dust. "Who's there?" a voice shouted from the drawing room. "If you're the grocer, I told you next week. We're expecting a remittance." Clara walked into the drawing room. Edmund was sitting in their father's armchair. He was wearing a dressing gown that was stained with wine. He was thin, pale, his hair thinning, his face stamped with the dissatisfaction of a man who believes the world owes him a living. He was holding a glass of amber liquid. He looked up. He saw the lawyer first and sneered. Then he saw Sven, and he flinched. And then he saw Clara. For a moment, he didn't recognize her. He was looking for the monster from the lithographs, the painted, terrifying creature. He wasn't looking for a woman in a Parisian suit with diamonds in her ears. "Who are you?" he demanded, trying to stand up but stumbling a little. "You wrote to me," Clara said. Her voice was cool, filling the room, bouncing off the empty walls. "You asked for £5,000. Edmund's eyes went wide. He stared at her face, the texture of the skin, the pattern of the dryness. Recognition hit him like a slap. "Clara?" he whispered. Then he laughed, a nasty hacking sound. "My God, it is you, the dead girl walking. You have the nerve to come here, to this house?" "I received your invitation," she said. "Invitation?" Edmund smashed his glass on the floor. "It was a demand. Where is the money? Did you bring it? Or do I have to call the constable and tell him there's a runaway lunatic in my parlor?" He took a step towards her. "You're grotesque. Look at you, trying to dress like a lady. You're a reptile, Clara. You belong in a cage. Father should have drowned you in a sack, not sold you. You are a stain on this family." Sven stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the light. Edmund stopped, terrified. "Do not touch me," Edmund squealed. "This is my house. I am the Count. Get out. Leave the money and get out." Clara didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't look at the floor. She walked past Sven and stood directly in front of her brother. She could smell the fear on him. It smelled familiar. It smelled like the nursery. "You are mistaken, Edmund," she said softly. She nodded to the lawyer. The lawyer opened his briefcase. He didn't take out a check. He took out a thick stack of papers tied with red ribbon. He dropped them on the dusty table with a heavy, flat thud. "What is that?" Edmund asked. "That," Clara said, is the mortgage held by the bank. That is the loan from the village merchant. That is the debt to the stable master. And that is the lien against the land." She placed her gloved hand on the stack. "I bought them all, Edmund. Every single penny you owe. I own the roof over your head. I own the chair you are sitting in. I own the glass you just broke." Edmund stared at the papers. His mouth opened and closed. You can't. It's entailed. I am the head of the house." "You are a tenant," Clara said, "and you are in arrears." She picked up the top document, the deed to the house. "I am not here to pay for your silence, brother. I do not care if you tell the world who I am. Tell them. Tell them that the Reptile Queen bought her ancestral home with money she earned by being brave, while her brother drank away his inheritance by being a coward." She leaned in close. He recoiled from her skin, but she didn't pull back. "I'm giving you 1 hour," she said. "Pack your bags. Take the carriage I came in. It will take you to the station. You have a small allowance waiting for you in a bank in London. Enough to live on, if you are careful. But you will never set foot on this land again." "You're a monster," Edmund screamed, backing away until he hit the mantelpiece. "You're a heartless, cold-blooded monster." Clara picked up the keys that were lying on the table. She weighed them in her hand. They were heavy. They felt cold and solid, like the silver coin Grimaldi had given her all those years ago. "No, Edmund," she said, and for the first time in 30 years, she smiled a genuine, terrifying smile. "I am not a monster. I am the landlord." Edmund did not leave quietly. He did not bow. He did not have the grace of a defeated general surrendering his sword. He left like a child who has been told the game is over. He shouted. He threw a vase against the wall of the foyer, shattering a piece of porcelain that was older than he was. He called upon the spirits of his ancestors to witness the theft of his birthright. But ancestors, as a rule, are quiet when the mortgage is unpaid. The ancestors did not answer him. Only the lawyer answered, standing by the door with his pocket watch in hand, counting down the minutes. 59. Edmund dragged his own trunk down the stairs. The servants, sensing the shift in power as animals sense a storm, had vanished into the scullery. He swore at the wood, at the stone, at the sister he called a devil. He stood on the gravel drive, his face red and wet with spiteful tears, and pointed a shaking finger at the upper windows. "The rot!" he screamed. "The rot is in the walls. You'll never scrub it out. It will eat you, just like it ate Father. You'll die here alone." Clara stood on the porch. She didn't shout back. She didn't need to. She watched him climb into the hired carriage, the black, utilitarian transport she had provided. It wasn't the gilded coach of a count. It was a vehicle for a passenger. As the wheels crunched on the stones and the carriage pulled away, taking with it the last of the toxicity that had poisoned her bloodline. A strange sound filled the courtyard. It was silence, not the terrified silence of the nursery, not the tense silence before a curtain rises. This was the heavy, deep, absolute silence of ownership. A bird chirped in the overgrown hedge. The wind rustled the dead ivy. For the first time in 32 years, the air on this property did not belong to a man who hated her. It belonged to her. She turned to the open door. Sven was standing there, holding a crowbar he had retrieved from the wagon. The accountant was dusting off his coat. The strong man was leaning against a pillar that looked fragile next to his shoulder. "The house is empty," Sven said. "Shall we lock it?" Clara looked at the dark maw of the hallway. She saw the dust motes dancing in the gloom. She smelled the damp, trapped air of a mausoleum. "No," she said. "We do not lock it. We open it." She walked inside. She walked past the shattered vase. She walked to the great windows of the drawing room. Windows that had been nailed shut for a decade to save on heating. Windows draped in 3 layers of heavy velvet to keep the neighbors from peering in. "Tear them down," she ordered. It was an invasion. It was a liberation. The troop, her real family, swarmed the house. They didn't treat it with the reverence of peasants entering a cathedral. They treated it with the practicality of stagehands striking a set. The velvet curtains, heavy with decades of dust and smoke, were ripped from their rails. Sven used the crowbar to pry open the painted, shut sashes. The glass groaned, the wood cracked, and then, whoosh, the wind rushed in. It smelled of wet earth and rain, but it was fresh. It chased the smell of old brandy and stagnation out into the corridor. Light, harsh and gray and unfiltered, flooded the carpet, revealing the stains, the cracks, the imperfections that the darkness had hidden. "It is a wreck," the lawyer said, surveying the room. "The roof needs lead. The floors are warped." "Good," Clara said. "If it were perfect, I wouldn't know how to live in it." She didn't stop at the drawing room. She climbed the stairs. Her legs were heavy, her skin pulled tight across her knees, but she didn't pause. She walked past the master bedroom where her father had died. She didn't look in. She walked to the end of the hall, to the door with the iron bolt on the outside, the nursery. The bolt was rusted open. She pushed the door. It swung inward with a shriek of hinges that sounded exactly the same as it had 30 years ago. The room was empty. The little bed was gone. But the smell was still there. That faint, sweet, cloying scent of almond oil and fear. The shutters were closed. A single strip of light lay across the floorboards, marking the spot where she used to sit for hours, watching the dust. Sven came up behind her. He didn't speak. He just stood there, a massive, warm presence at her back. Clara walked to the center of the room. She touched the wall. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing the gray plaster beneath. She remembered scratching that plaster with her fingernail, counting the days. "This room," she said, her voice echoing in the small space. "This room is too dry." "We can seal it," Sven suggested. "Close it off. Never open it again." "No," Clara said. She turned to him. "We're going to knock this wall down, that one facing the south. We're going to put in glass, floor to ceiling. We are going to run copper pipes under the floor and pump steam from the boiler. We are going to fill it with ferns, with palms, with moss." She looked around the prison that had defined her childhood. "I am going to turn this cage into a lung. I am going to make it the most humid, green breathing room in England, and I am going to sleep here. And that is exactly what she did. The renovation of the estate took 2 years. It became a local legend. The villagers, who had once crossed themselves when passing the cursed gate, now stopped to watch the wagons arriving. Not circus wagons, but builders' carts. Glass from Venice, boiler parts from Manchester, tiles from Morocco. The money flowed not into dissipation, but into construction. The monster of the manor became the eccentric countess. It is funny how money changes the adjective. If you're poor and strange, you're a lunatic. If you are rich and strange, you are merely eccentric. And Clara was very, very eccentric. She did not restore the house to its former glory. She did not try to recreate the aristocratic tomb of her father. She built a machine for living. The entire east wing was converted into a solarium, heated by a massive steam engine in the cellar. The air inside was thick, tropical, heavy with moisture, perfect for her skin. She didn't need to grease herself constantly. The air held her, and the house filled up, not with ghosts, but with people. Retired acrobats with broken backs found a home in the guest cottages. The living skeleton, a man named Isaac who had been displayed for his thinness until he was too old to tour, became her head gardener. The bearded lady, a gentle soul named Mary who had no family, took over the kitchens. The estate became a sanctuary, a home of wonders, they called it, in the village taverns, though no one dared to mock them to their faces. The sheer collective strength of the inhabitants and the sharpness of Clara's lawyers kept the mockers at bay. There is a letter in the archive from the vicar of the parish, dated 1860. He writes to the bishop, "I went to the manor today to collect the tithe. I expected depravity. I found a library. The woman, the one with the skin, sat at the head of the table. She was reading Euclid to a blind man. She offered me tea. I have never seen a face so scarred, nor a dignity so complete. She terrified me, but not because of her appearance. She terrified me because she seemed to have no need of God's forgiveness, as if she had already forged her own salvation out of iron and steam. Life did not stop being hard. Her condition was progressive. As she aged, the plates of her skin grew thicker, harder to move. There were days of pain, days when the joints seized up, when the simple act of holding a cup was agony. But on those days, she was not locked in a dark room. She was in her conservatory, surrounded by the green pulse of life, and Sven was there to lift the cup to her lips. She was not suffering in secret. She was suffering in her own kingdom. She lived to be 72. A medical impossibility, the doctors said. A woman with her condition usually died in infancy or adolescence from infection. But Clara didn't die. She outlived the brother who exiled her. She outlived the doctor who suggested killing her. She outlived the showman who bought her. She lived long enough to see the world change, to see the gaslights give way to electric bulbs. And now I want to show you the final document, the end of the paper trail. Here we are, 1886, my office. The smoke from my pipe is drifting across the desk. The dust motes are settling on the file I'm about to close. I have 2 photographs here. The first, you remember, the blurry, frightening lithograph of the reptile queen on the poster, a creature of nightmare designed to extract pennies from the fearful. The second is a real photograph. It was taken a week before she died. It is set in the garden of the estate. The trees are huge now, oaks and beeches she planted herself. Clara is sitting in a wheelchair. She's wrapped in shawls, but her face is visible to the sun. Her skin is a map of her history, cracked, weathered, ancient. It looks like the bark of a great, enduring tree. But look at who is around her. There are children. Not her biological children. Her condition made that impossible. But the children of the troop, the children of the outcast she took in. A little girl is sitting on the grass, holding Clara's hand. The hand that terrified thousands of people in London and Paris. The hand that looks like a claw. The child is holding it tightly, playing with the rings on the stiff fingers. The child is not afraid. That is the victory. It isn't the money, though she left a fortune. It isn't the house, though it stands to this day. It is the fact that a woman who was told from birth that she was too hideous to be loved ended her life holding the hand of a child who saw only a grandmother. Grimaldi was wrong. Her father was wrong. The crowd was wrong. They thought the monster was the girl with the skin. But the monster was the silence. The monster was the shame. And Clara? Clara was the hunter who killed it. I am putting the obituary back in the drawer now. I am not going to run it. The paper today will have a different headline. I wrote it myself this morning. It reads, Clara of the Manor, philanthropist, businesswoman, matriarch, survived by a loving family. She was born a curiosity. She lived as a legend. She died as a queen. The file is closed. The debt is paid. The house is open.